The series begins by showing Chi, an ambitious young girl with a beautiful singing voice, whose ultimate dream is to star in a musical drama someday. Though she appears to be full of life, behind her happy facade lies a dark secret that defies all natural laws. She possesses a unique and overwhelming power, the ability to see the remaining time left in a person's life. This gift, however, is more of a curse as she is powerless to prevent their inevitable death. One fateful afternoon, she is traveling by bus when the unexpected happens. A series of crashes occur on a nearby bridge, causing chaos and panic. As police and paramedics rush to the scene to save lives, Chi views the tragedy from a different perspective. She can see the exact amount of time each person has left, and it is a heavy burden to bear. Despite her overwhelming emotions, Chi remains focused and observes everything that unfolds before her. Her unique ability allows her to see the bigger picture and helps her to remain calm in the face of such a horrific disaster. But deep down, she wishes she could do more to prevent these inevitable deaths. Amidst the chaos and tragedy of the bridge crash, Chi encounters an elderly couple who are visibly shaken but physically unscathed. As she offers the wife a band-aid to help with a minor injury, Chi glances at the husband and realizes that he only has a minute left to live. Stunned by this revelation, Chi is unsure of what to do and feels helpless as she witnesses the man's impending fate. Suddenly, the man suffers a heart attack, and Chi is left with a difficult decision. With no medical training, she is unable to save the man's life, but she can ease his passing. Acting quickly, she advises the wife to remain calm and spend the last moments with her beloved husband, allowing him to pass away peacefully. Though she feels powerless in situations like this, she is grateful for the opportunity to provide even a small amount of comfort to those in need. Her ability to see how much time a person has left may be a heavy burden, but it also enables her to appreciate the value of every moment and the importance of cherishing the time we have with our loved ones. As fate would have it, Chi's power of knowing how much time a person has left to live turns on her, revealing that she only has 167 days left to live. This revelation shakes Chi to the core, prompting her to reevaluate her life and make the most of the time she has left. Determined to live life to the fullest, Chi auditions for every musical show in town, hoping to fulfill her lifelong dream of starring in a musical drama. Despite her fear of rejection, Chi refuses to let her time limit hold her back and continues to pursue her passion with unwavering dedication. In the midst of her own struggles, Chi finds time to visit her friend, Ms. Oh, at the hospital. Despite their significant age difference, the two women have formed a close bond, and Chi is saddened to learn that Ms. Oh's new boyfriend, Mr. Park, only has 67 days left to live, while Ms. Oh still has 2 years. Though she doesn't reveal her own fate to them, Chi feels a sense of empathy for the couple, knowing what it's like to be aware of someone's inevitable death. As Chi exits the hospital, a sudden impact sends her flying, and she lands on the hard pavement. Dazed and confused, she soon realizes that she has been hit by a car driven by Lee, a young man with a crippling fear of driving due to his anxiety attacks. Lee, the privileged son of a wealthy businessman and the owner of a budding entertainment company, is quick to blame Chi for the accident, accusing her of carelessness. Angered by his callousness, Chi confronts Lee, only for their argument to escalate when he insists on making her sit in a wheelchair and see a doctor to prevent any potential lawsuits. This unfortunate encounter threatens to derail Chi's plans to audition for a coveted musical role, as she is left with little time to get there. Desperate to make it in time, Chi implores Lee for a ride, but he repeatedly refuses, insisting that she leave him alone. Undeterred, Chi takes matters into her own hands, hopping into the driver's seat and taking the wheel. Despite Lee's initial protests, he soon realizes that Chi is a skilled driver and they race towards their destination, with Chi pushing the car to its limits to make up for lost time. As Chi bids Lee goodbye, he suddenly realizes that she has taken his car keys with her. In a rush to retrieve them, he chases after her and ends up in an auditorium where a strict musical choreographer named Joe is overseeing auditions. Joe is a notorious perfectionist who is hard to impress, and he is quick to reject even the most talented performers. Despite her nerves, Chi summons the courage to sing a beautiful song about childhood love. As she pours her heart out, Lee watches her from the audience, captivated by her stunning voice and emotional delivery. However, Joe is not convinced, claiming that her performance lacks authenticity and meaning. To prove her point, he asks her to demonstrate that she has experienced true love in her life. Faced with the daunting challenge, Chi scans the audience for inspiration and sees Lee. In a bold move, she rushes towards him and plants a brief kiss on his lips, hoping to convey the depth of her emotions. But even this dramatic gesture fails to sway Joe, and Chi is left rejected and dejected, wondering if she will ever achieve her dream. Lee was taken aback when he realized that his key was missing and accused Chi of stealing it and assaulting him. However, Chi calmly handed him the key and apologized before leaving. Lee felt guilty for raising his voice when he saw Chi crying. Later that night, Chi met her close friend Sung-hye, who knew about her unique ability. They talked, and she revealed that no matter how hard she tried to save someone from dying, it never worked out. Even under the safest circumstances, those people would pass away due to either heart attacks or accidents. Meanwhile, Lee was on a romantic date with his girlfriend, B, who happened to be the daughter of a wealthy businessman. Lee was smitten with B, but unlike him, she was arrogant and manipulative. Lee had proposed to her multiple times, but she always accepted the ring without saying yes. B knew that Lee was not in love with her and wanted him to feel the same before they got married. Lee was set to travel to China the following day to meet with an investor. The following morning, she received a scuba guide job offer in China. She bid farewell to her mother and younger brother before heading to the airport. Upon arrival, Lee and she coincidentally ended up staying at the same villa. Lee was informed by his secretary that the investor, Jen, had arranged a scuba diving excursion for the next day. Although hesitant, Lee could not refuse the request of an investor. The group went scuba diving, and Lee discovered that she was their guide. She led them into the water and showed them the beauty of the ocean. Once the tour was over, she led the group back to the boat, but Lee was missing. She immediately dove back into the water and found him. Lee, who had lost hope, was relieved to see her. They shared an oxygen tube and swam towards the surface while holding hands. It was at that moment when she noticed that her timer had stopped working, leaving her shocked and breathless, causing her to pass out. After waking up, she found herself back in the boat, and her watch was functioning properly. However, as soon as Lee walked into the room, the watch stopped once again. She was astounded, staring at Lee and then at her wrist in disbelief. To test if Lee was the one causing the malfunction, she walked away from him, and as she expected, the timer resumed its normal function. This led her to realize that if she remained near Lee, she might have a chance to live longer. In the next scene, Chi was back in Korea with Sung-hae, and she was equally surprised to hear that the timer had stopped on its own. Additionally, Chi recalled that she had not seen a timer on Lee, further complicating the situation. A week later, Chi received news that Lee and director Joe were collaborating to create a musical, a grand-scale project with a significant budget. If Chi landed a role in the production, she would be closer to Lee and achieve her dreams simultaneously. From the following day, she trained arduously, giving her best to prepare for the performance. While Chi was busy preparing, Lee and Joe were embroiled in a silent battle, vying for more authority over the selection process. Joe wanted to keep control of the play's casting, but Lee, as the organizer, insisted on having a say in it. The power struggle between the two threatened to derail the entire production. On the day of the audition, Chi delivers an outstanding performance, leaving Lee in a strange state of mind. As he listens to her sing, he feels an unfamiliar sensation in his heart, almost as if it's beating in time with the music. Overwhelmed by the feeling, he steps out of the room. She notices his absence and confides in her friend, Sung-hae. Eager to help, Sung-hae devises a plan to bring Chi and Lee together. While they wait for the audition results, Chi sets her sights on Lee and begins stalking him, determined to extend her lifespan. She even goes as far as posing as a driver candidate to gain access to Lee's office. When Lee refuses to hire her, Chi boldly follows him to his home and asks him out on a date. Before they can continue their conversation, 3 men show up, sent by Sung-hae to attack Lee. The plan was for Chi to come to Lee's rescue and win his heart, but instead, they all end up at the police station. The police officer intervenes and calms Lee down, asking him to wait in the waiting room. As they wait, Chi falls asleep on Lee's shoulder. Despite feeling annoyed, Lee can't deny the warmth he feels inside. He rationalizes touching her hand as a way of repaying her for saving his life during their scuba diving trip. Unbeknownst to them, the timer on her arm starts ticking in reverse, extending her lifespan instead of shortening it. After waking up, they leave the station together. At first, Lee ignores her attempts to talk, but before he goes, he hands her the car keys and tells her to be punctual the next day. This means she has landed the job as his driver, and she can now be with him more often, potentially lengthening her life. As she drives away, Lee watches her jubilantly celebrate and can't help but smile. Lee spends the morning researching Chi's background and learns that she comes from a wealthy family that suffered financial ruin when her father was imprisoned for embezzlement. Despite their difficult circumstances, Chi remains optimistic and determined to succeed. As they drive to Lee's office, he finds himself constantly thinking about her, though he tries his best to keep his distance. Throughout the day, Lee becomes increasingly distracted by thoughts of Chi, even yelling at his computer screen as if it were her. Meanwhile, Chi does her best to remain close to him at all times. Later, they run into Joe, who compliments Chi on her improved singing since the audition. After hearing the compliment from Joe, Chi is overjoyed and Lee can't help but feel a tinge of jealousy. But when she starts gushing about the director, Lee's jealousy turns into irritation, and he snaps at her to be quiet. Later, Lee notices a picture in his office that he has lost interest in and realizes that he no longer finds things attractive if he looks at them for too long. He decides to use this technique to get rid of his feelings for Chi. That evening, Lee surprises Chi by inviting her to dinner. Although she is confused by his sudden kindness, she accepts the invitation. However, to Lee's dismay, he finds himself unable to take his eyes off of her, and his frustration only grows. She received a call from her father who was in prison. Seeing how much she missed him, Lee felt sympathetic towards her. As they walked to the car after dinner, Lee unconsciously held her arm, and she was taken aback when she noticed the timer on her wrist counting down the time until her death had started to go in reverse. Even though she didn't mention it to Lee, this was a surreal experience for her as she had already accepted her inevitable fate a long time ago. To take her mind off things, Lee decided to take Chi to the movies. As a diligent employee, Chi obediently followed him, and while they watched the film, she couldn't resist testing her theory that the timer would stop when she touched Lee. However, when she unknowingly touched his hand, things got awkward between them, and Lee got too close for comfort. Chi was so flustered that her cheeks turned red, but as she glanced at her timer, she was amazed to see that it had indeed stopped counting down and was now reversing. The day after, Chi receives an email informing her that she has not been selected for the musical. As she walks through the hallways, she runs into Joe, who offers some feedback on her performance. Joe tells her that although her voice was emotionally charged, she failed to convey those emotions fully. He sees her as a rough diamond, but the musical needs a polished one. When Joe starts to criticize her, Chi hits back with a sharp retort, calling him a peanut before storming off, leaving Joe bewildered. Later that day, while out and about, Chi bumps into Lee and B quickly discovers that Chi is their new driver. B's guard immediately goes up, and she invites Chi to join them for dinner, making Lee uncomfortable. However, Chi seems unbothered by the awkwardness and agrees to go. When they arrive at the restaurant, they discover that only 2 seats are reserved, which leaves Chi alone to dine on the terrace. Lee suggests that she should go back home as it wouldn't look good if they disrespected her. B, on the other hand, argues that they should let her stay and even hands Chi a check to pay for her meal. During dinner, Lee can't help but keep his eyes on Chi, who seems to be enjoying her meal. This surprises him as he thought she would be humiliated to be left alone. B excuses herself to go to the restroom, and Lee sees this as an opportunity to approach Chi. He pulls her out of the restaurant and questions her about how she can be okay with seeing him with another woman. Confused, Chi looks at him, and that's when he confesses that he likes her. The argument between Lee and Chi triggers the countdown on her timer, and she now only has 91 days left to live. The following day, they are both in a sour mood, but fate brings them together again when Lee needs a ride to the airport to pick up his brother, Yoon. Chi reluctantly agrees to drive them and ends up meeting Yoon, who is a charming and affable person. He tells stories from Lee's childhood, revealing that despite his cold exterior, Lee is actually a kind person and helps to bridge the gap between Lee and Chi. The following day, Chi drives Lee to a family gathering where it becomes clear that everyone expects him to plan his future with his manager, B. Although B wants to be with Lee, she also realizes that he has feelings for Chi. The next day, B tries to bribe Chi with gifts and warns her not to tempt her future husband. Meanwhile, Lee seeks advice from his friend, Song-bin, who happens to be a doctor, about his feelings for Chi. As Lee confides in Song-bin, Chi wanders around the hospital and notices a timer on a man's arm. As she walks around the hospital, she notices a man with a timer that fluctuates between 54 days and 6 minutes. She realizes that something terrible is about to happen. Suddenly, the man barges into Song-bin's office, expressing his dissatisfaction with the medical services he received. He pulls out a knife and threatens Song-bin's life. She walks in and tries to reason with the man, but he is beyond reason. He tries to attack her, and Lee heroically jumps in front of her, taking the hit. After recovering from his injuries, Chi reveals the truth about the timers on people's arms and explains to Lee that she had been using him to stay alive because her timer stops when she is with him. In the next scene, Lee kisses Chi, and her timer adds up some valuable life minutes, increasing her remaining time from 91 to 87 days. As they pull back from their kiss, Chi surprises Lee by telling him that she wants to take him on a date, but it's not your typical romantic date. They walk through the hospital where Chi works, and she shows him different patients and their last wishes. One elderly man begs for some chocolate, and Chi helps him get it because he only has 1.5 days left to live. She explains to Lee that this is how dates will be with her because she wants to help people fulfill their last desires. Lee tells his assistant, Park Jin, to check on the old man that Chi helped the other day. Afterward, Lee has a conversation with B and decides to cancel their upcoming wedding. B knows that Lee never really loved her, but she still wants to wait for him. Lee then meets with Jin again and learns that the old man passed away. He then asks Chi how much time he has left, but she can't see it. Lee invites Chi to stay with him so they can keep her timer from ticking down. They sleep in the same house but refrain from being intimate. The scene then shows Chi and Lee join Chi's friend Ms. Oh and her partner for a barbecue. As they discuss Chi's ability to see timers, Ms. Oh reveals that she can also see them. Lee is shocked to learn that he has 61 years of life left, while Chi has only 86 days remaining. The next morning, Chi wakes up and notices that she has gained an additional 8 hours of life, wondering if this is because of the time she spent with Lee. Meanwhile, B becomes more aggressive in her attempts to ruin Lee's business partnerships and sabotages Chi's musical audition by offering the director a famous actor to perform instead of her. She also tries to bribe Chi's mother to persuade her daughter to stay away from Lee. Despite B's efforts, Lee remains unfazed and refuses to let Chi go. In fact, he takes her hand and stands by her side. B even invites Chi to have a talk with her and blames her for all her troubles, but she remains intimidated and unsure of how to react. Everything was going smoothly until the day of the audition role distribution, when things took an unexpected turn. Director Joe had instructed everyone to take a break before announcing who would be the lead actor, so Chi decided to take a walk with her friend Lee. However, their leisurely stroll came to a halt when they stumbled upon a woman named June, causing Lee to freeze in his tracks and Chi's timer to start counting down again. B had invited June to play the lead role of the musical, but Lee was clearly bothered by her presence. On their way back home, Chi drove Lee home, and his timer eventually stabilized as his emotions began to calm down. During another meeting with B, she revealed to Chi that June was Lee's first love, who had broken his heart, making it impossible for him to ever truly get over her. Later, when she returned home, she was surprised to stumble upon her friend Yoon and notice his timer on his shoulder. Yoon's timer only had 29 days left, and when he visited the hospital, his doctor revealed that he had only 6 months to live due to a rapidly progressing illness. Yoon asked Chi not to tell anyone, revealing that she had been right to worry about him all along. A flashback takes us back to the moment Chi first noticed the ominous clock on her wrist, sending waves of fear and anxiety through her. She confides in her friend Mizo, who advises her to tell her friend Lee about it. When she eventually shares the news with him, Lee is in shock and terrified of losing his only family member, his younger brother Yoon. Desperate to find a cure, Lee enlists the help of his friends to find an expert doctor, but they are devastated when Song Bin informs them that nothing can be done to save Yoon. Lee pleads with Chi to find a way to stop his brother's clock, but she explains that spending quality time with him is the only way they can make the most of the time they have left. Following Chi's advice, Lee and Yoon cook breakfast together the next morning and decide to plan a trip to enjoy their time together. Yoon also wants to reconcile with his family and arranges a family dinner. However, things take a turn for the worse when Yoon asks for a family photo, causing tensions to rise and the atmosphere to become uncomfortable. Yoon's father tells him that he has been gone for so long that he can't expect anything from the family. Despite this, Yoon spends time with Lee, Chi, and their friends, cherishing every moment. That night, Lee and Yoon share a bed, which is something Lee has always wanted to do since their father separated them as kids. Yoon urges Lee to let go of any grudges he holds against their father and older brother. Suddenly, Yoon passes away, leaving his family in shock. In honor of Yoon's wish, the family takes a photo together, despite Yoon's absence. After the tragedy, the family tries to resume their normal routine. One day, their sister calls out to Lee to hurry up, but upon seeing him, she notices his disheveled appearance and straightens his shirt. As she embraces him, she sees both of their countdown timers, Lee's on his neck and hers on her wrist. As she recalls her promise to Yoon to take care of Lee, she notices something odd. Their timers are counting down in opposite directions. Lee's is decreasing while hers is increasing. In a rush to not steal any more time from Lee, Chi drives him to work. Later, when she's alone, she notices her timer has stopped and sends Lee a text message saying that she's going to stay with her mother and brother for a few days. Meanwhile, Lee has a quick meal with June and asks her why she left him and disappeared. Later, she gets a surprise visit from her mother and brother, who reveal that they've been bribed by B. B invites Chi and June to an awkward breakfast and reveals that each of them represents a different period in Lee's life. June represents his past, Chi represents his present, and B represents his future as his wife. Despite B's declaration, Chi declares that she loves every second she spends with Lee and doesn't regret being with him, even if it means giving up some of her own time. She even comments that the wedding ring will look good on B's hand. As Chi abruptly leaves, B confronts June about her past and her reason for leaving Lee 5 years ago, leaving June feeling uneasy. But then Chi has a change of heart and returns to Lee's home, brewing coffee and suggesting they spend the day on a date. After a walk, they cuddle up at home to watch a thriller movie that leads to them kissing. Lee falls asleep on Chi's lap, causing her to feel guilty about loving him so much and potentially hurting him. The next day, Lee goes to work only to find out that Chi has resigned. He takes her outside to talk to her, but Chi is distant and claims that she stopped loving him and feels nothing for him. Lee presses her for an explanation, but Chi remains tight-lipped and refuses to reveal anything further. Director Joe calls for an emergency meeting, revealing that June must resign from the musical due to an issue with her throat. Lee and June have a heart-to-heart talk, finally finding closure from the past when June reveals that Lee's father was the reason she ran away from Lee 5 years ago. Meanwhile, Chi visits Mizo, who is spending time with her partner, Professor Park, and realizes that there are only 2 days left for him. When Park gives them some privacy, Chi confides in Mizo about breaking up with Lee. Mizo encourages her to go back and be with him if that's where her happiness lies. Later, Lee meets with Song-hae and confides in her about his recent breakup with Chi, but unfortunately, she cannot offer him any advice. Song-hae noticed something strange about Lee's time, so she confronted Chi to ask for an explanation. She reluctantly revealed that Lee's time had actually been transferred to her own timeline. Shocked by this revelation, Song-hae decided to take action and approached Secretary Jin to gather more information about Chi. Jin revealed that Chi had left Lee due to B's unbearable behavior and that she actually had feelings for Lee. With this newfound knowledge, Song-hae encouraged Lee to talk to Chi and try to mend their relationship. Lee mustered up the courage to confront Chi, but to his dismay, she lied to him and claimed that she had only pretended to love him for his money. She also admitted that the story about the time transfer was just a ruse to get closer to him. Tragedy strikes as Professor Park passes away. Chi attends the funeral to offer her condolences to Ms. Oh, while Lee also shows up at the event, having been invited by Ms. Oh herself due to their brief encounter at the barbecue. While paying their respects, Lee manages to steal a moment alone with Chi and takes the opportunity to confront her once again about their relationship. Despite Chi's repeated claims that she doesn't have any feelings for him, Lee refuses to believe her. Desperate for answers, Chi resorts to lying to Lee once more, this time telling him that her time seems to run faster whenever she's around him, and that they have to stay apart to prevent her from losing any more time. In a heart-wrenching scene, Chi begs Lee to let her go and walks away, but Lee cannot bear the thought of losing her and grabs her hand, determined not to give up on their relationship. In the next scene, Song-hae tries to make amends with Jin by buying him a cup of coffee. She feels guilty for setting up a meeting between Lee and Chi, which caused problems between them. Meanwhile, director Jo breaks the news to the producers, including Lee, that they need to hold another audition for the lead actor in the musical. With limited time, this is a challenging task. Later, Lee contacts Chi, who notices he's standing at a distance to protect her timer from ticking down. They converse on the phone while gazing at each other from afar. Lee assures her that he won't do anything to harm her, but he knows that her rejection of him was only due to her timer, despite her love for him. The following day, Chi and Lee unexpectedly cross paths in the company's hallway. Lee tries to walk past her, but as he does, Chi's timer stops and starts again when he leaves her presence. Meanwhile, Lee meets with B and confronts her about her attempts to sabotage his business. B denies any wrongdoing and claims she heard that Lee and Chi had broken up. She insists that she is ready to take Lee back and accept his marriage proposal, but Lee rebuffs her, telling her that he has no romantic feelings for her and no future with her. Despite Lee's rejection, B refuses to give up and they run into each other again at a family gathering. B puts on a facade and acts as though everything is normal, but Lee's father urges him to focus on his business and make arrangements for his wedding to B. The situation becomes even more complicated as Lee's family pressure him to marry B, while his heart still yearns for Chi, whose fate seems to be intimately linked with his own. In a bold move, Lee announces to his family that he will not be marrying B as he has no feelings for her. He leaves the room in frustration, and B tries to persuade him to reconsider, but he asks her to leave him alone before he starts to despise her. Meanwhile, Song-hae and Jin discuss how both Lee and Chi are suffering because they cannot be together. Jin then runs into Chi at the company and informs her that she forgot some clothes in Lee's washing machine. Acting on the opportunity to see Lee, Chi heads over to his house, where she spots B lurking outside. B pleads with Lee for another chance, admitting that she doesn't need his love, but just his presence, and that she can endure the rest. It's a heartbreaking scene as B clings to Lee, hoping for a future with him, while Chi looks on, knowing that the man she loves is slipping further away from her. The scene reaches a climax as B clings to Lee's hand, and Chi watches on in disappointment. When Chi walks away, Lee pulls his hand away from B and apologizes, telling her that he cannot be with her. B, however, is not deterred and changes her appearance, keeping up her facade when she runs into Chi at the company. She brazenly tells Chi that she and Lee have made wedding plans and are set to get married. Despite the ongoing drama, Chi shows her talent and dedication when she meets with director Jo that night. He recognizes her deep emotional understanding of the main character in his musical and decides to conduct the auditions among the existing actors, with the lead role going to the person who deserves it. With the musical's future hanging in the balance, Lee must navigate his complicated romantic life, while Chi works to prove herself on the stage. As B continues to pressure Lee about their impending marriage and business partnership, his father adds to the stress by questioning his behavior and rejecting his decision to break things off with B. Overwhelmed, Lee turns to drinking to numb his emotions, prompting Jin to call Chi for help. Together, they manage to stop Lee from spiraling out of control. The next day, Jin expresses concern for Lee's well-being, but Lee is determined to take control of his life and end his misery. He first announces that his company will take over the responsibility for the musical, leaving the actors to decide whether to stick with Jo or join the company's production. Then, he meets with his potential business partner and informs him that he cannot work with someone so easily manipulated by B. She receives a text message informing her that Ms. Oh has passed away and she rushes to her funeral. Outside the entrance, she bumps into Lee, and together they walk into the ceremony, only to discover discover that it is actually a party. Mizo is not dead but has staged her own funeral to reunite with her old friends and talk about things she never had a chance to before. She explains that if all her friends came to her funeral after she died, it would be meaningless. In a private moment, Mizo reveals to Chi that she has the same ability as her and can also see the timers on people. She recounts her own tragic love story, where she fell in love with a man who only had a year to live, and her time started transferring to him, forcing her to leave him. She asks if she knows more about their ability, but Mizo admits that she cannot control it either. As the story continues, Mizo reveals to Chi and Lee that extreme emotions can affect the countdown clock. Lee gets a chance to talk with Mizo and discovers notes from Chi hidden in a teddy bear. Chi confides in Song-hee that her clock stops when she's away from Lee. Lee approaches Song-hee for information about Chi's time, but she refuses to answer. In his office, Lee confronts Chi about his own time and she reveals he has 60 years and 333 days left. However, when he asks about her own time, Chi runs out without answering. Lee suspects that Chi is keeping her distance because something is happening to him, not her, and pays her a visit outside her house to discuss his suspicions. Chi struggled to avoid revealing the truth to Lee, but she eventually gave in and confessed. She explained that when they were together, his lifespan was transferring to hers. Lee was stunned but realized that there was no point in holding on to his time if he couldn't be with Chi. Their conversation ended with a passionate kiss. Lee then declared that he would stay with Chi and she wouldn't be alone anymore. However, Chi refused to let him sacrifice his lifespan for her sake. The moment was interrupted by Chi's mother, and Chi pleaded with Lee not to make things harder for her because her mother was unaware of her abilities. She even considered running away from Lee, but the news of Joe becoming the lead actor for the musical almost changed her mind. Lee found out about Chi's dream and encouraged her to perform in the musical, promising that they would keep their distance to prevent their lifespans from being affected. They would only see each other from afar, ensuring that their clocks remained stable. Lee was feeling pressured by his father and B to make their relationship official, and so they arranged a meal with B's parents to discuss their wedding plans. Lee reluctantly attended the gathering, but instead of going along with their plans, he surprised everyone by announcing that he did not want to marry B. B became aggressive, threatening to turn the press against their companies if Lee did not comply with their wishes. She also met with Chi and made a chilling ultimatum: either Chi gives up on Lee and runs away, or B would use her power to cancel the musical, which would hurt everyone involved. But Lee was unwavering. He knew he could not live without Chi and refused to change his mind. B left his office feeling defeated, and as she walked past Chi, her timer caught Chi's attention. B's timer was fluctuating wildly between 54 years and 3 minutes, indicating that something was seriously wrong. She immediately alerted Jean to call Lee, fearing that B might be heading to the terrace. She and Lee frantically chased after B on the terrace, trying to prevent her from taking her own life. B's timer was counting down from 10 seconds, and as Lee tried to stop her, B declared that she couldn't live without him. In a last-ditch effort, she leaned forward, but Lee managed to grab her and save her life. To everyone's relief, B's lifespan returned to 54 years. In the days that followed, B unexpectedly visited Lee at his office. She made peace with him, admitting that she had done everything she could to win him over, but now it was time to let him go. Lee and B were finally free of their complicated past and were able to move on. Later, Lee took Chi for a walk, maintaining a safe distance between them to protect their lifespans. As they strolled, Chi asked Lee to sing for her, and he obliged. They both felt a sense of romantic intimacy as they confessed their love for each other. The day of the musical finally arrived, and B came to visit Chi backstage after the first part. She wished Chi all the best and admitted that it made her feel better to see the woman who won her man over become successful and famous. As soon as the musical ends, Lee takes Chi back to his house, where he covers his neck with a hoodie and wraps a piece of cloth around Chi's wrist to prevent them from constantly checking their timers. They spend a magical night together, and the next morning, Lee brings breakfast to Chi in bed. When she has a moment to herself, Chi sneaks a peek at her timer and is surprised to see how much time she has gained. However, her joy is short-lived, as she begins to worry that she's stealing Lee's time. Lee notices that Chi seems anxious and suggests they go for a walk to clear their heads. They end up at a supermarket, casually browsing the aisles. However, Chi can't shake her guilt and eventually runs away, afraid that she's draining Lee's lifespan. She confides in her friend Song-hee, begging her to collect some clothes from her house so she can leave town and avoid stealing more time from Lee. However, Song-hee cannot keep the secret from Chi's family, and she spills everything about the timers. Chi's mother confronts her daughter and Lee separately, desperately trying to find a solution to save Chi's life. Meanwhile, Chi is stunned to realize that her clock is rapidly gaining time, and she knows it's because Lee's life is transferring to hers. She tries to escape from him, but in a dramatic turn of events, they both get hit by a car while crossing the street. In a flashback, we see Chi playing with her beloved grandma when they were both hit by a car. Her grandma shielded her from the impact, taking most of the damage. This traumatic event caused young Chi to become aware of the timers and see her grandma's clock ticking down. Meanwhile, young Lee was in the car with his father during the accident. Later in the hospital, Lee comforted Chi by holding her hand, forging a connection between them. As adults, years after the accident, Chi and Lee coincidentally cross paths on a street, causing Chi to notice not just her own timer but also the timers of the people around her for the first time. As the flashback ends, Chi awakens in a hospital room and frantically checks her wrist for her timer, but it is nowhere to be found. Lee enters the room unscathed, and they are both relieved to see each other safe and sound. The series concludes with a montage showing that their lives have come together, and they are now living together in a state of contentment and happiness. The moral of the story is that we should appreciate and cherish the time we have with our loved ones. Life is short, and we never know how much time we have left, so it's important to live every moment to the fullest and pursue our dreams with dedication and perseverance.